Before tanks, before bombs, before drones, there was wheat and water, and the men who controlled them controlled everything.
For 5 centuries, the greatest weapon wasn't forged in steel. It was grown in soil, and those who mastered it didn't need armies to conquer nations.
This is the story of how food became a bullet, how water became a blade, and how hunger became the most effective weapon ever created. The 16th century. Europe's population is exploding, but the land cannot feed them all. And someone has to decide who eats and who doesn't.
Emperors discovered a simple truth. Control the grain, control the people. Tax the harvest, tax their loyalty. Every kernel of wheat was a unit of power.
Water routes were power routes. The empire that could redirect a river could redirect the future. Irrigation wasn't infrastructure. It was domination dressed as progress. Bread prices determined peace. When wheat was cheap, kingdoms were stable. When prices rose, revolutions were born. A failed harvest didn't just mean hunger. It meant the collapse of social order. Starvation turned neighbors into enemies. Food riots weren't random violence. They were political messages written in desperation. When bread disappeared from markets, rulers disappeared from thrones. Governments learned to ration, not to save lives, but to save themselves. Controlled starvation was better than chaotic rebellion.
The most valuable fortress didn't hold gold, it held grain. Wheat became currency, silos became vaults, hunger became leverage.
For 2 centuries, this system held. Fragile, brutal, effective. But then came the 1700s, and with it, the realization that hunger could be manufactured. The 18th century introduced a new weapon, artificial scarcity. Merchants discovered they could create famine, even in years of abundance. Speculation. The word sounds modern, but in 1750, traders were already gambling with hunger. Futures markets turned bread into abstract profit. France, 1789. The revolution wasn't sparked by philosophy alone. It was ignited by bread prices. Marie Antoinette never said let them eat cake, but the bread shortage said everything. Hunger exposes inequality faster than any manifesto. When the rich ate pastries and the poor had nothing, revolution became inevitable. The March on Versailles wasn't about ideology. It was about bread. Starving mothers took on an empire because their children were dying. Revolutions taught governments a lesson: control food distribution or lose power. State intervention in food markets began, not as welfare, but as survival strategy. Rationing systems emerged, not to feed everyone equally, but to decide who deserved to eat. Agricultural reforms increased yields, but increased production also increased control. More food didn't mean more freedom. Europe was exporting its food system, and with it, exporting control. The seeds of colonial hunger were being planted. The 19th century would perfect what the 18th began. Colonial empires would transform food from a weapon into an entire warfare system. Ireland,
1845. 1 million dead. Not from war, from policy. While people starved, Ireland exported food to England. Colonial rule mastered a perverse economics. Extract food from the hungry to feed the full. Colonies were forced to grow cash crops, cotton, indigo, opium, not food. Their land fed British factories, not their children. Tens of millions died in colonial famines, not from crop failure, from crop export. The food was there. It just wasn't for them. Railways weren't built to develop colonies. They were built to extract faster. Infrastructure wasn't progress, it was efficient theft. British administrators documented everything. Their records prove famine wasn't accidental, it was administrative. Ships heavy with grain left Bengal's ports. Millions of Bengalis never recovered. Empire fed on colony. Colonial agriculture destroyed food sovereignty. Diverse farms became monocultures. Resilience became vulnerability. Water systems were redesigned, not for local need, but for export production. Rivers served empires, not communities. By century's end, colonial food systems were perfected. Millions could starve, while global grain markets reported surplus. The 20th century would industrialize this cruelty. World War I introduced blockades, not against armies, against civilian food supply. Starvation became military strategy. Rationing went global. Governments controlled every calorie. Citizens became soldiers in a war of scarcity. Farms became battlefields. Agriculture became ammunition. Food production militarized completely.
Governments weaponized psychology. Food will win the war wasn't a slogan. It was strategic communication. Hunger became patriotic duty.
Rations shrank annually. Each year, citizens learned to survive on less. Hunger was normalized. Soviet Russia, 1930s. Stalin collectivized agriculture. When Ukrainian farmers resisted, he used their grain as a weapon. The Holodomor. 7 million starved to death. Soviet soldiers seized every kernel. Villagers who hid grain were executed. Starvation became genocide. World War II refined starvation tactics. The siege of Leningrad killed 1 million through hunger. Food became a siege weapon. Every nation rationed. Every government calculated minimum calories for survival. Death by hunger became administrative. Bengal, 1943. 3 million dead. Churchill diverted food to Britain while Indians starved. War priorities revealed imperial values. World War II ended. 50 million dead. But starvation had killed as many as bombs. And the lesson was learned. Hunger works. Post-war, America discovered food aid was influence. The Marshall Plan fed Europe and built American allegiance. Food became diplomacy. Aid wasn't charity, it was alignment. Feed a nation, earn an ally. The Cold War was fought in wheat fields. American abundance versus Soviet shortage. Capitalism's best propaganda was bread. The Green Revolution promised to end hunger. New seeds, new chemicals, higher yields. But it also created dependency. Nations that adopted it couldn't easily leave it.
Dams became geopolitical statements. America built dams in allied nations. Soviets built dams in theirs. Water infrastructure was Cold War terrain.
Traditional farming collapsed. Green revolution required purchased seeds, fertilizers, irrigation. Farmers became customers. Food sovereignty became food dependency. 7 U.S. states, 40 million people, one river. The Colorado barely reaches the ocean. Water conflicts are no longer theoretical. Ethiopia builds a dam. Egypt threatens war. The Nile's water determines regional stability. River control is existential. Climate change doesn't create gradual decline. It creates shocks, repeated, unpredictable. Food systems designed for stability face chaos.
Global grain reserves, 60 days. 2 months between normalcy and crisis. The buffer that protected civilization is gone.
COVID-19 proved food access is fragile. Supply chains broke, prices spiked. Hunger returned to wealthy nations.
Technology offers solutions. Vertical farms, lab-grown meat. But who controls these technologies? Solutions can become new dependencies.
2024. Global protests. Different nations. Same trigger. Food inflation. The pattern holds. Scarcity destabilizes faster than ideology. 5 centuries. Same weapon. Different wielders. From emperors to corporations to climate itself. Food, wheat, and water remain instruments of power.
The next war may not announce itself with sirens. It might begin with a poor harvest, a closed border, a price spike, and by the time we recognize it as war,
It will already be underway, because the greatest weapons are the ones we don't see until we're hungry.